Greetings, future fossils, from Melbourne, Australia, on the first full Australian day of a month-long tour that I'm taking through this country and its summer music festivals, speaking, painting live, playing music. Got a number of tour dates in the cities to Melbourne, Sydney, Wollongong, Byron Bay. It's a very exciting time, a very important time to be out in the world as a hopeful and inspired and diplomatic American. I'll be recording a lot of podcasts out here also, so keep an ear out for those in the weeks and months to come. Before we start this most irreverent episode with Cory Allen, I want to invite you to subscribe to Future Fossils on iTunes, on Stitcher, wherever you listen to this show. Subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps us out immeasurably. Also, if you're one of the other listeners of this podcast, poor ambivalent bastards, that's what really this is all about. Still uses Facebook, serving the nascent planetary self emerging through us all. So if you can get behind that kind of rhetoric, please do us a solid and spread the word. Also, this podcast is ad-free due to the support of patrons on my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Michael Garfield, where I put out all of my new music, writing, art, and all of the other creative work that I do. If you like keeping these podcasts conversation heavy and marketing light, then consider joining the community of patrons over there and give yourself a hug for me until we get to see each other in person. And with that, let's welcome astral hustler, jazz Buddha, madman, Cory Allen to the Future Fossils podcast.
Fuck out of here.
Let's get you the fuck out of here.
Yeah. It's always a good way to start
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Future Fossils Podcast. I'm Michael Garfield. Co-host Evan Snyder is on hiatus at the moment, so it's just me and Cory Allen today, our fabulous guest with whom I just spent the last 3 hours having a non-recorded conversation, which is the interesting thing about putting the rhetorical emphasis in this show on archival and legacy and continuity and the future listening is that I have a lot of conversations with people. I had one with author J.F. Martel last week where there's a recording glitch for one reason or another, and half or all of the conversation is gone. My buddy Chef Duden and I had one of those at Boom Festival where we lost the first hour of the real juicy stuff. Mm-hmm. And as I was talking about with Cory a moment ago, the show isn't just about the message. It's also about the contemplation of mortality of that message. And, the fact that these things aren't all getting recorded. Like the weird thing for me about hosting a podcast is how many amazing conversations, in some cases the best conversations, happen off record. And yet maybe that doesn't change the basis, the framing of it. Maybe it's the future doesn't need our digital audio in order to crunch some vast AI computation of all of the air particles in the room and being able to reconstruct what they looked like 100 years ago.
Yeah, the future's going to be just fine.
Yeah, they don't need our recordings. So,
you look at those podcasts as broken fossils.
Yeah, so that's the thing too is like, we've discovered maybe 1% of all of the dinosaur species that ever lived. So there's no guarantee that anyone's going to listen to this, and that's just fine.
And how weird is it's not the dinosaurs. They think that they had feathers.
How weird is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just we have this idea in our mind of like, from being a kid, it's like, yeah, there were these giant lizards, blah blah blah. Everything is everything is seen, all imagery, Jurassic Park, all Hollywood movies, and the T-shirts, books, everything about dinosaurs was always that they're lizards, and then now there are some reports that saying, oh, actually, we think that they all had feathers.
Well, there's a book called All Tomorrows. I think that's the name of it. I wish this book were around when I was a kid, because it's essentially a literary deconstruction of scientific narrative reconstructions of the ancient world. And so they show, if we were going to reconstruct a tiger the way that we reconstruct a dinosaur today, this is what a tiger would, or a goat, or these other modern creatures that we know they have all of these bizarre plumage or colors or soft tissue features.
That's a good pickup line. You want to check out my bizarre plumage?
You want to check out my waddle? so this thing is, that there's like, oh, we could, for all we know, we could be 5,000% wrong. Every Tyrannosaurus Rex could have had a huge pot belly, with an udder hanging from it, for all we know. And it's preferable. Like, so there's that. I've been on the birds are dinosaurs tip since I was a small child, so it doesn't weird me out. But the cool thing is noticing what does weird you out, right? And this is where we touch into your work as both an audio engineer and a mindfulness trainer. It's interesting to notice what I find surprising because it reveals my expectation.
Right.
And so it's like, it's often that encounter with the quote unquote truth, or rather a refreshed apparent truth. It's like, well, it's still Maya or whatever, but to encounter the updated version of it and it being different from the memory or the expectation.
Yeah. It's highlighting the dark places on your map.
Yeah. So that's like the dragon is on that map is actually where you will find your own surprise.
Yeah.
People are afraid of being surprised.
I love it.
But you hate horror movies.
Did I say that?
You did.
When?
You might have been joking.
I don't recall saying that. I don't like them. That is a fact, but I don't remember saying that. Interesting. I really don't think I said that.
You may not have used the word hate.
When did we talk about horror movies? I have a really good memory.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I had a conversation right before I met you today. That it may have been someone else.
I think it probably was.
Anyway, so.
I have my memory is so creepy that I sometimes kind of like play it down a little bit.
Oh, because you don't want the girl to realize that you accidentally saw her phone number and instantly memorized it. Yeah.
And just in conversations in journal, a lot of times, because it's so weird to be like, actually, what we said was these three sentences. So it's good to just take it down a notch. You know what I mean? No, I appreciate you calling me on it, because usually I'm that guy that's like, no, you definitely said this. And I find myself like, they just put out that thing with the rolling buffer, the audio buffer, so that whenever you want, you can capture the last minute and share the last minute of audio. And otherwise it just constantly records over itself. Right.
I find myself being one of those people that's like, yes, that day has come. Because if it's your word versus someone else's, who knows? But if it's on record, then you could be the asshole who was right.
Yeah, it's true. But I think that also, if you're approaching life in a way in which you're relying on a recorded version of your conversation to justify your current points, then you're approaching life wrong in general.
Unless you're a police officer, in which case, like when I accidentally camped at the wrong spot at Enchanted Rock last week, the guy came up and the park ranger was wearing a camera. I was like, it's actually really nice to see that it only solves half the problem. The other half is that should be a live feed.
Yeah. That's what my first thought was, him talking to his partner being like, can you believe they actually think these are on, or even have any guts inside of them? There's these little plastic shells that look like cameras.
Totally. But, I think,
That's no, you know what that is? That's where their third eyes have been extracted and then encapsulated into that thing that seems to look like a camera, but it's actually this kind of weird, mind control device that the government has placed on. It's like they can have it next to their body, but they can't actually use it at all.
That is actually like Wayne Barlow, who is a painter, and he actually was all over Facebook railing on the fact that Jurassic World didn't give dinosaurs feathers, that they hadn't updated it, because he's done a lot of dinosaur illustration. But he also did a book on hell, Barlow's Inferno, and in that book, the soul of the damned is represented by this black orb that every one of them has like monstrously located in their body somewhere, like a deformity sticking out. They've somehow become separate from and yet still attached to their essence, but that they're sort of the disfigured vestige still clinging to the soul.
That's cool.
And that kind of, it's got that same, like the little black shiny camera
certainly does.
In the park. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, no offense, I'm sure he's a great guy.
So I think that it's the curious thing to me about dinosaurs having feathers is that it is anything that's got some hair, some fluff, some feather to it is so much less threatening to humans than something that's scaly and just lizardy. So to think that it's like they instantly become so cute, until they reveal their little teeth there, but they're. It just kind of de-monsterizes them a lot, just as the way that humans respond towards other animals. Like if you got a face, we'll give you the time of day. Like worms, you're gonna be laboratory experiments. But snakes, we're gonna use you as a symbol for evil and entire course of Western religion because you ain't got no arms or legs. Missed no shoulders over here, slithering around. You're gonna be that. You got a face, but you're the face of evil. Yeah. Try again, but then you get to, rabbits, dogs, cats. We take good care of them because they're furry. They're more close to us than a snake or a worm. They got a good face on them. You can recognize emotional responses, or what we anthropomorphize as emotional responses. And so with dinosaurs having feathers, also your cat is meowing, which I think they're applauding what I'm saying right now.
Either that or she's attempting to manipulate you.
Yeah, which that's definitely cats are amazingly good at doing. But yeah, it is funny to think about them being just a little less intuitively icky by having feathers.
Yeah, having one of those little Bambi raptors or whatever. Replacing, that's the actual name of miniature. The animal. That's the Velociraptor family critter that's about the size of a Maine Coon or a small dog. And just the thought that it's curled up in a little loaf in the corner, and its claws are retracted.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when it's feeding time, you get like the beef roast out of the fridge and just throw this 3 pounds of red meat right at it, and then you're good.
That's actually, and that's the thing actually about encountering that dragon at the edge of the map is that the closer you get to it, you see somebody. This is the whole psychology behind drone warfare, right?
Right.
Like if you are on a video game screen where the resolution is intentionally low enough that you can't actually make out the facial expressions of the people that you're remotely firing on, then you're going to have a different relationship to them than you are if you can't fire until you see the whites of their eyes.
Right.
And then it's like there's this thing like, the more intimately we discover the ancient world, the more it goes from being this monstrous prehistoric terror type situation to being like, oh, well, it's kind of relatable. Okay. They had families.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. They fed their babies, that
other babies. They're so human. They fed their babies, other animals' babies.
Yeah.
They were, not so bad after all.
They were just like us.
Well, I really don't think that, and maybe it's just my kind of general agnosticism about my own existence. But whenever I look at that, I don't think of that as like terrifying or monstrous. The dinosaur, it's actually super, extremely human in a lot of ways, because it's just nature, like without any interference whatsoever. And there is violent death and a whole lot of carnivores roaming around. But I think that saying, or like the idea that is monstrous or terrifying, is inserting the human consciousness over a experience of being that has nothing to do with us. It's just a state of being. There's nothing terrifying about it. It's just being. Us saying it's scary is the human ego having to insert our paradigm on prehistory, which is, it's just what we typically do. That's one of these ideas I've been expressing a lot over the last couple of years, is that all of this resurgence and renaissance around talking about consciousness is great. But still, whenever I present the idea that looking at consciousness through the lens and filter of human consciousness is still missing the point in a lot of ways, because it suggests that everything that we are, cognating through our human lens is has to do with us, and that all of this consciousness ideas and the idea about what our consciousness means and related to the cosmos and so forth, the internal, the external, it's completely 100% wrapped up in humanness. Whenever human consciousness is a symptom of the universe existing, not the other way around. So it's not human consciousness, it's just consciousness. That's, in my opinion, that's the thing that interests me, and I think is perhaps a broader area of exploration, is taking the human element out of it to a degree, other than, of course, the that's how we're going through life, is by being online with human consciousness. But when thinking about the cosmos, trying to see how much you can get out of relating it to the fact that it is there for you to observe it, that we're like kind of anthropomorphizing the universe. That's what I hear most people doing.
It's like a Playboy girl or something.
Yeah, it's like how everything relates to them and their consciousness. It's like, yeah, but that's one tiny frequency of consciousness out of infinity, is your puny little human frequency. So, getting out of that and thinking about it as a symptom of greater awareness, and not awareness in the sense of that the universe has a name and skin and teeth, and again, that's the human description. But it's like, yeah, it's just a wah 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 of happening, of cells and energy and vibrations. It's like, that is the consciousness. Our thing is just a tiny little piece of it.
I learned a vocabulary word last night.
Lay it on me.
Allopoiesis. So like autopoiesis is the process of self-becoming. Mm-hmm. This is what they talk about, like self-organization in living systems. This autopoiesis of a cell.
I did a whole album about that.
Oh, dude.
The Great Order.
Yeah.
It's about self-organization, the spontaneous order of nature articulated through music.
Well, shit. Apparently, we need to know each other better than we do.
I can take my shirt off.
I've definitely written a few tracks about that very thing. But then there's allopoiesis, which is the process of becoming the other. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the hallmarks of the psychedelic experience, is of a direct encounter with the absolutely alien.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, whether or not I'm not talking about an extraterrestrial.
Right. Sure.
And, this whole self-other boundary thing is relative to where you ordinarily perceive that boundary.
Sure.
You know, that the other is your own unconscious mind from one frame, you know, but that there's this aspect of, I mean, I think most people have had the experience of, even if it's just from sitting on their leg for too long and then looking down at this thing and being like, that's not me.
Right.
You know, and
having it right now.
so, or, you know, there's this question about more directly to your point about, you know, consciousness, human consciousness. We have a sample size of 1 right now.
Right.
We're hopefully just a few years away from having regular conversations with dolphins, you know, and then maybe we can start collaboratively piecing together what consciousness is from a certain point.
Yeah. I mean, think about the sign language with gorillas has been going on since like the 70s.
Yeah. So there you go.
I mean, they're already communicating.
There's a bit of, with, you know, chimps, bonobos,
right.
gorillas.
Coco was,
yeah.
she crushed it with the sign language.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this message where she was talking about how disappointed she was in people for not to, and that's where you got to wonder, like, I'm
That's
pretty
amazing.
sure if I put a deaf person up to this video that they would explain that the sign language is accurately representing, but it's like, well, okay, but now I'm pretty sure that they trained the gorilla that they didn't just make up a bunch of stuff to like lure this gorilla into some sort of political campaign.
Right.
Or whatever.
And all of it gets more complex. It's like, well, how is the gorilla understanding and relating to the semantic system or the, you know, the hand language system put forward by the people who taught it? Like, how to look further into that is like to our anthropomorphization of her expression is still a layer that I think should be taken into account. Where it's like you can teach them a system of hand signs which, you know, have different sentiments, but to what level of awareness does that creature, and how richly and deeply is that creature using those to express ideas, and are they nuanced and as subtle as we are taking them as? Or is it like, because she can sort of like communicate somewhat in a very, very primitive way with hand signals, which is totally amazing. It's like, how much of the gaps and quote unquote humanness are we kind of putting into that, into the very observation of it?
I'm sure that's still a valid question, even after people have spent our entire lifetime.
Right. Because it takes
pursuing this professionally.
Exactly.
And that somebody probably has a way better answer to that question
Certainly.
than either of us.
Probably people that actually work with her.
Yeah. And people can be like, no, she totally knows.
Yeah, totally.
What,
like,
you know.
Like, is it two dudes that haven't thought about Coco in 8 years? Or is it someone that actually is still seeing her every day and working with her? That dude or lady has a great
but, you know, I mean, we are still sort of, and we're going to be for a long time, parsing experience from human experience,
right?
You know, and
there's nothing wrong with it because it's the filter through which we experience reality. But I think just like you're talking about in some, you know, transcendent or psychedelic experience, saying that you're knowing the other. The reason why I went was because I think that inherently in that description of the other should be the description of the awareness of the fact that you're receiving that through the conduit of the human nervous system.
Oh yeah.
And
sure.
You know what I mean? And that's just a good, healthy kind of scientific approach to intangible data to show, like, you know, we talked about this 2 hours ago, where it's like, yeah, you know, you get into these complex, murky states of consciousness or thought or even verbal explanation. And I think it's so important to make it clear that, you know, you're aware of your subjectivity in it, because so many, and that's sort of one of the rabbit holes that I think people go down a lot in having those experiences, and they start defining them as this is, this happened, I experienced this and this and this. But to me, that is sort of if you hear people talk about psychedelic or some even, you know, meditative spiritual experience, whatever it could be that they had, that they believe that they, you know, made their consciousness rip through some membrane into the other, by their very description of it as being truth, tells me that they don't understand their own consciousness.
Well, there's that. I mean, there's also, you know, the different cultural conventions about talking about this stuff. You know, like there is the sense in which you're making love and you're never actually feeling the other person.
Well, yeah, with all the leather and spikes and stuff, you wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for me, it's really like through like plexiglass is my thing, you know. But you know, I'm into the Billy.
I like the bulletproof glass. When I like to shoot at someone with live rounds, there's a hole in bulletproof glass, but I have to be shooting at them, you know, during.
That's like, he's just like, you're not real. but so like here's a thought that might be useful to orienting ourselves in this space. That selfhood might be something that you sort of position at, say, the North Pole of a sphere. On the South Pole is otherhood, right? But from where you are, all you can see is to the horizon,
right?
You know, so you never really see all the way around, you know, and as you walk over there, you know, yourself with relationship to that fixed point moves, but the relative point is always on the opposite end of it, you know. So I think there is this is like my habit is just the Yogi Berra quote, like arrive at a fork in the road, I take it.
Right.
You know, anytime we encounter one of these, this is my woo-woo prevention foolproof mechanism here, which is the fail-safe. It's like anytime we notice that we're getting to this point where we could talk for an hour about how things are this way or this way, it's like, well, no. It is the case that we never see beyond the virtual environment presented to us, you know, by the nervous system.
Yeah.
But it's also the case that our own subjectivity and experience of being completely bound by that membrane is inseparably a part of that absolute other, you know, that invisible ecosystem that's supporting all of that stuff. So you don't really, on the one hand, you could never really know the other. On the other hand, you never really know anything but the other.
Right.
You know?
Right. Because you are the other.
Right.
Yeah,
you are the fucking alien. Yeah. And that's where, you know, that alien as a relative term that still to a lot of Texans means people living right over there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The people that you bought your taco from today. You know?
And that are actually like keeping our country together.
Right.
You know,
right.
Because they
like,
actually.
Whereas you're the one that is unaware of the name of even a single species of tree in your yard. I'm pretty sure you're the alien.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. In different states of being, for sure. But, you know, I think that the idea of knowing the other is it's through our very subjectivity, our understanding and abstraction of an external reality creates a completely 100% unique reading within your own system, your body, your consciousness. You know, the awareness of your thoughts is based on past interpretation, you know, past experience. Even the past experience on its own is a recipe which creates a different consciousness for every single human being. And so we're all getting a different reading from universe, and therefore us perceiving universe, we will perceive it differently because of our nervous system and our experience and so forth. And then we're taking a reading which is different because of the same reason. So we get a different frequency, a different vision of what reality is. But so is everyone else. So everyone is the other, and everyone is reading the other at the same time. But I think that it's always wise, to what you were talking about, in science, if you're doing research, as important as the thing you're studying and the results you get from what you're studying, what instrument you used and what settings were used on that instrument are just as important as the research itself, because then it's, you know, replicatable and verifiable and all of that. The conditions in which that information was received should be noted. And that's how I approach human consciousness and experiencing thoughts outside of explanation, really, the further states of consciousness, deep, transcendent states of consciousness, always, I believe, should include the instrument they're using to see them, which is your nervous system.
Yeah. It's a fairly recent shift in scientific protocol. When I started down the path to being, an academic, that it was very much the case. You affect this pretense of objectivity, that you don't use the first person in a scientific publication.
Right.
You don't do it. Whereas now it seems like it's much more the case that people say, well, because when it comes to the replicability of an experiment, if you can run the same botanical experiment underground in a basement, so there's no sunlight or moonlight or anything coming in, and you run it one way and you run the exact same controlled conditions the next week, you get different results because the moon is in a different phase and there's subtle gravitational stuff you're not measuring.
Sure.
It's never a closed system, so you're never really able to replicate the experiment. But you can get people as close as possible by saying, full disclosure, I believe in psychic phenomena. Full disclosure, I do not believe in psychic phenomena.
Yeah. Full disclosure, what do you think? Can you read what I believe or not?
Well, just to think like that, there is actually a weird statistical phenomenon in psi research about this, where like people get these self-verifying results on experiments that are otherwise seemingly completely controlled. And people are trying to replicate negative or positive results from people who have the opposite beliefs, and they're getting opposite swing in the statistics, which suggests something is going on there. But it's like, until you actually include the researcher himself or herself in this, then you're never going to get to the bottom of this issue. And especially anything involving subjectivity.
Isn't that funny that we were talking about, psychic phenomenon, and both of us said the word especially at the same time?
Just the first three letters of it.
It was because we also psychically heard each other saying it and stopped.
Just for anyone listening, we're having the whole conversation telepathically.
They could hear it. So in their minds. No, and also, I mean, in something like that, the researcher's bias is out of control. I can only imagine the person that would take the time to put their name and weight into psychic research should probably be investigated, to some degree, because someone who's
all
doing
scientists really should be, because none of us as human beings, none of us are completely purged of our bias.
Totally.
And that's the whole point of the instrument.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things about science that's the science in America that is just makes me want to just get a hand drill and just drill right into my forehead is that one of my best friends is a PhD in molecular biology. And I knew him, when he began his school, and now, through the whole process, and now he's a doctor. And so hearing about the underbelly of what it takes, how this game is played, it boggles the mind that, like, and I guess, did you do a science degree or something?
I mean, I have an undergraduate degree. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess you probably experienced some or a lot of this, where it's like, I couldn't believe the stories he would tell me on a weekly basis of just the amount of like subterfuge from professors, from, the bias and selectivity of grants, of who would get in what labs to even have the time to be able to complete their degree. And it's like, if you don't have the lab time, then you're not gonna be finishing. You're gonna become a doctor, because you got to have your research. You put your research forward and all this stuff. But then you're auditioning for time to even do your research, because the professors and just the whole system. It's like, my friend was, he's very open about this, but he's like, he was on the edge, man. Like, whenever he's 8 years in or whatever, like deep into it, we were having lunch, and he genuinely was like so deep and like stretched out because he's writing for grants all the time. You're tap dancing for your supper all the time too. You're constantly writing grants. And so he's like, man, I really understand. Like people really can go crazy, And I was like, all right, man, I think we need to, let's take a step back and like, let's talk about some other aspects of what's going on here. Because like when you're sitting back being like, I think I'm losing my mind, like essentially saying that out loud because of the stress and the absurdity and the pressure and like how impossible they make it for you to even, accomplish anything. It's like,
this is where facts come from,
right?
People.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. And he was a Buddhist for, I don't know, 20 years. So the fact that he's in there killing worms all day was a funny polarity to it.
Yeah.
C. elegans was his. He actually did amazing stuff. He
909 cells.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's why it's such an effective research animal. You can
cool.
You can count the cells.
Well, I'll tell you, this is perfect for you. So he actually had some pretty impressive discovery that he did, which his whole thing was figuring out how those C. elegans move towards dampness. And because they don't have the sense organs to sense wetness, but yet they move towards it. Obviously you see the worms come up when it rains. They come up out of the, get to the water and stuff. And he actually was synthesizing DNA for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and was able to write up a theory in paper which explained how they were approaching and understanding and sensing dampness, which was actually published.
That's very curious.
Amazing. Yeah. Totally amazing.
But at the risk of losing his mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even it's amazing that even after graduation, the game doesn't stop there. Well, his professor tried to like hijack that paper I just told you about and say, we should put my name on it, and then we'll put you as a contributor because I want to get this published in Nature. And it was basically like, if pretty much you owe me, and if I need my tenure. And so if you want to move forward, essentially, then I'm going to jack your breakthrough.
That's honestly one of the reasons that I didn't stay in the academic world.
Did that happen to you?
It was a kind of a complex falling out.
Sure.
But one of the things that happened with that was that the paleontological field research program that I was working with, that I'd been working with every summer for years, that I was super excited about, fell apart. It wasn't associated with my university. The head of the program at my university was one of these guys that just jacked people's research and told my friend that when she was working in his lab that he didn't think women belonged in science. And it was just one of these nice. These deals where it was like, this guy is, I was doing an independent study with him, reconstructing the neck of Camarasaurus. It's this, like a brontosaurus type dinosaur.
That drives a Camaro, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, did a lot of cocaine.
Nice.
His huge nostrils.
And the huge, the 80s glasses, they're like the blue tinting, like the mirrored blue tinting.
In fact, if you watch Denver the Last Dinosaur, then you know. So attempting to reconstruct this neck from carving each bone out of wax based on the original illustrations from the monograph from the 19th century, cool. Which is essentially insane because you're trying to take 4, maybe 5 views of something and reconstruct it in 3D.
Right.
So you're not going to get an accurate thing.
Sure.
But I learned that he was essentially grooming me. He told me basically point blank, he was grooming me to correct the mistake that he had made when the paleontological illustrator John Gurchie had studied under him. And now John Gurchie is the guy who does those photorealistic paintings of dinosaurs on the cover of National Geographic. And John Gurchie, I guess he felt like John was the one that got away, that he hadn't managed to like exploit him. He hadn't managed to keep the rights on the work that he had done while he was his student.
Right.
And he made it really clear to me. He's like, yeah, if you end up creating the entire skeleton, basically if you end up going like 500% above and beyond the scope of this independent study and redo the entire animal and not just its neck, then, maybe we can get some models made and sell them and like you can get a cut of the profits. And I was like, dude,
it's a lot easier ways to make money than that.
I'm pretty sure I could build my own pyramid faster than I can build yours.
Right.
So I have other friends that stuck with it in the academic world. That whole issue of the social construction of knowledge.
Yeah.
Not just the difficulty of having to live in that culture, but how there's calling it conspiracy might be a little harsh, but it is, of academics trying to make it look like everything is okay. We know what's going on.
Yeah.
We got our shit together.
Yeah.
You can trust us. Whereas on the inside, it's like spy versus spy.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think it is a conspiracy in the sense that they're conspiring to prolong and enrich their own careers off of the work and trust of students. Mm. And I've from what I've heard from various people, that's just pretty common, and it's unfortunate. I'm sure there's great ones out there, but it blows me away that structure even exists, and so much of it is around funding.
The question is, like, if there were not, well, a question anyway, is that if there were not funding involved, how would that change the game? And it's like every ecosystem develops around the limited resource.
Right.
So in these cases, the limited resource is tenure and grant money.
Yeah.
And so you end up with all of the pathology of power involved in that. Whereas the scholastic thing, I'm trying to remember the original etymology of it, but the word school actually comes from a word that meant leisure. It meant like, let's all sit around and think about this stuff and inquire into the nature of reality. And it wasn't associated with meeting objectives or acquiring resources.
My first thought was just like rap lyrics about you, I schooled that guy. Oh, yeah. Schooly D, Leisure D. That makes sense. Interesting. Maybe he's smarter than we even realized.
Because if you're taking somebody to school, it means that you're clocking them out.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, hey, you better just sit back down.
Yeah. Let me teach you what's going on.
Yeah.
Let me leisure you really quick.
Yeah.
I think
sit back.
Did we just discover the underbelly of the rap community?
Two white guys?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
No, I'm actually wearing all white makeup.
You're good. For a podcast interview, you really went above and beyond there.
Well, yeah, it's a 3-hour that's why I was late. This is a 3-hour the makeup department. Yeah, it took a while. It happens. But yeah, man, I think that not having infinite resources is good because it creates pressure, and not pressure in the sense of anxiety, but pressure in the sense of motion and drive. But the pressure's too high right now. And, I think the way it's structured, from what I have just been told secondhand, is that the stream is way too fine, and that if they would dilate that a bit, that America might not be, 970th in the world in science or whatever.
Yeah, out of only 158 countries or so, like we had to invent 800 countries in order to fail this hard.
We didn't invent them. We'll go conquer one small country and then break it into 800 pieces. Yeah.
That's what Doug Rushkoff called that narrative collapse.
Uh-huh.
Everyone's got a different reality now. I actually haven't listened to any of the episodes that you've recorded with Michael Phillip for Third Eye Drops, but I would imagine, given his predilections, that you end up spending quite a bit of time talking about the reality tunnels.
A little bit, yeah, here and there. Yeah.
And that if your paper towel tube gets thin enough, then each of them just completely excludes, a little bit more attention. Like, this is where the funding and money, it all kind of follows the same dynamics, or it seems to for me, that that the more narrowly focused our attention, the more we have to compete for one another's attention.
Right.
And then the more that creates these problematic power dynamics in our society, Whereas like, were we able to cultivate our attention and dilate it? It's funny that we've got, what is it, like 10 million people in the United States with an Adderall prescription right now?
Probably.
That's just constricting that bubble further, or that tube, I worry about the stuff with, pick up on any of this, there's like 15 entry points to this, but there's the filter bubble with search results, and this concern that if we don't at least have the option to pick results that are the opposite pole, if we can't get allopoietic search results, they're only autopoietic search results that reinforce that which we already virtualize as self.
Right.
And I feel this very intensely with all of my artist friends on Facebook, where over the last few years, as the algorithms have gotten more and more refined, it's gotten harder and harder to reach new people, reach new fans, even reach the fans that you've already got. All of this wealth and all of this money, and so many more people following me now than I did 5 years ago, and so little of my business now as compared to then is coming from these surprise encounters, spontaneous interactions. You're seeing in the art world the same thing that you're seeing in the academic world. It's being throttled back in some way, a little too carefully managed.
Right. I mean, if having audience insights so that you can define and connect with a group of people and then communicate your message, your product, or whatever it is great. But, to a degree, as you said, I do think that the more that gets refined, the less that your worldview gets challenged. And that's where growth comes from. Because if you're always just seeing things on Facebook that you like, seeing things that you're getting positive, feedback from, and you're liking it, and that it continues to only serve you more clicks and more posts like what you like. And if you see something you don't like and you tap on the little thing in the top right corner of the arrow, it says, I don't want to see this. You ever done that? Yeah. And then it says, why? And then you can tell it why, and it will adjust its algorithm to show you less things like that. So it's interesting that as that, and that's just sort of the Facebook is a good example because it's out in the open with its selectivity. It's chosen what and how it's choosing to do things for you and show you things. So the more that occurs, the more you'll only be looking at yourself, essentially. It's like you're fine-tuning everything out of your reality other than your own preference. And so over time, as that continues, and that happens, like with connectivity over just how humans interact, you can physically also get into much more specific groups and meet much more like-minded people because of those type of things. And that's great to meet like-minded type of people. But over time, as that evolves or devolves or however you want to look at it, at what point and perhaps that's why social pressure is so extreme or seems extreme right now. You look at like the presidential, situation, it's like there's just these two white hot sides that are just blown away that the other exists and think that the other are the antithesis of everything that's good and right, because they are to each other. It's because the two sides are so extreme. And of course, there's a 5% of gray area or whatever. But it's because these two disparate sides are so intensely different that in itself could be a result in some of this, streamlining of egoic preference to sell more things to you on social media, because that's the thing that always kills me. Basically, the more we find of what we like, the less we're challenged, and the less we're challenged, the less our minds get blown by the difference in the beautiful difference in variation of human experience. It's like, I like talking to someone that I don't agree with because I learned something, and it doesn't mean like you don't have to go around your day agreeing with everything all day long. It's like, it's good to, yeah, exactly. It really is. It's awful. It's like, it's great to hear, different perspectives and see and experience different things. I mean, like I went and saw the Nutcracker last Christmas because I was like, I've never been to a huge ballet production before. I've never seen like that, and I would have never have like choose to go to that. But it's like, let me go see what that is like and see, you know. And it was one of the weirdest fucking things I've ever seen in my entire life, man. Oh my God, the level of self-awareness. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but there's one point, like maybe the third act, where like all these, well, maybe in the middle, all these rats, like people in rat costumes come out, and I guess it's like the Rat King or something is dancing around. And first I was like, you know, some of those actors are fucking backstage in those rat costumes. That was my first thought. Second thought was, so after that, and then in the third act, whenever the little kids, they're just in chairs on the stage, like in each corner of the front of the stage, with their backs to the stage, watching. I guess it was like a bunch of different countries, like representatives would come out and dance, like in their style. I don't remember what was up with it.
Circa turn of the 19th, 20th century.
Exactly.
You know,
yeah.
like
So
Prussia.
Prussia was showing up. Yeah. And so the kids are watching this. I guess it was like sort of a dream sequence.
Yeah.
But I was like, the level of self-awareness in this play that it has about itself, of having the kids present on stage in chairs with their backs to the audience, watching the thing themselves, which is in their own minds. That's brilliant. And then of course the music, they have it's wonderful. You know, it's not like, again, it's not my preference, but musically, compositionally, it's immaculate as a creative expression. Anyway, you know, so I was like, wow, it's amazing. You know, it's good to go, but people do that, I think, a lot less and less and less. And perhaps, as you said, maybe it's because of we're all being kind of groomed to go into ultimate ego gratification mode, which is only looking for things that confirm our own biases.
Have you seen Century of the Self?
No.
It's a documentary on advertising and how we made the shift with television advertising from advertising the product to advertising the lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And advertising the choice and like the illusion of choice, basically. Selling people on how now we have, because the last time I went into a Starbucks, which occasionally happens because I'm trying to be polite and not just steal wireless internet somewhere, you know,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'll buy a coffee, whatever.
Sure. And I mean, coffee's glorious.
And they have 50 different names for, it's sort of like going into a Taco Bell. You've got 7 ingredients, and we're going to do every permutation of those 7 ingredients. Right. And we're going to name them each something to make you feel like you're making a choice between a burrito and a gordita or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, you guys,
I'll take the rat tendon meal and the science cheese. I'll have that, please.
Yeah. So it's, you know, in that respect, it is definitely malevolent.
Yeah.
You know?
Corn or flour tortillas. Oh, I'll have the flattened Chinese newspaper that's been boiled down and had peach pits and apple cores pressed.
But it's interesting because, you know, if this goes on the way it's going, then by the time these future archaeologists are listening to this, they will have already dealt with the problem of the logical conclusion, which is that we realize the way that what was it, maybe 10 years ago or so, the Minneapolis I-35 bridge collapsed because it was too well designed, basically.
Yeah, it needs to flex. Right?
It wasn't. Yeah. It was designed with no redundancy.
Right.
And so I read a paper around that time talking about the internet and...
Sorry, I just had this image in my mind of actually just losing its will. Like the bridge was there one day. It was like, man, I'm so tired of being a bridge right now. I'm just gonna let go. That would be
the. You're definitely not encountering any others in that DMT space. The article was about. It must have been more recently than that because it was around the time of the 2008 financial thing, or like leading up to that, and people warning, saying, "Look, our global economy is too well connected. When we have different countries with their own different economies, one country can fall and it's not going to pull everyone else down.
And it creates competitiveness.
And it's like, good. Now we have Greece can fall, one tiny country can fall, and it'll screw up the whole system.
Yeah.
And so this issue of diversity and redundancy are values unto themselves now in a way that was completely invisible to us 10 years ago. And I think it's probably going to be even more the case in another 10 years, where people are actually actively seeking out, like, show me something I don't like, to the point where the corporate machine, every fold of that commodification, co-opting that new terrain is just hilarious and ironic every time, because it's like the next thing will be, they will find a way to sell us things we don't want.
Yes.
Because they were doing it before, and then we like reached our golden age of, I don't see commercials that I don't like.
Right. Which is pretty much now.
But then we're going to get to this point where we're desperate, because we recognize that we need the diversity of experience. We recognize that we need these contradicting oppositional perspectives. And so Hillary fans will be out there like, where is my Trump? And they'll be like, oh, here you go. Let me sell you the opponent. Let me sell you the other side.
Yeah.
So I kind of imagine this being a pendulum swing thing, where it goes from the century of the self to the century of the other. At some point, I can imagine projecting into being an old man and being like, I'm so glad to see that there's so much emphasis on getting out there and meeting different types of people and encountering difficult, challenging perspectives. And people will be like, oh God, Dad, it's so much more horrible than you think. Like, it's just... So for that reason, I love listening to Christian radio. It's one of these places where for years I've taken on the exercise of just... Radio is especially good because you're your own captive audience. Like, you can change it, but you're going to be stuck in traffic for half an hour or whatever. You might as well just sit it out and sit there.
Listen to the applause station I was talking about creating
earlier.
Yeah,
the applause. But like, I think on the web, it's a little... in my own experience, it's a little harder to pin myself in front of something that I don't immediately enjoy. On the radio, I mean, like, okay, maybe a song I like is coming on next. I'm going to like this song. I'm going to sit here and find out why this song is playing to millions of people right now, and sit there and actually appreciate it.
Yeah.
Take that perspective.
And also,
sit in the
you
other chair.
can appreciate it without liking it. I think that might be the key to what you're talking about, is appreciating something without liking it.
That's an interesting point. But I think that if you appreciate something enough, you find yourself...
You can get some Stockholm Syndrome. It's like you have to like look at it long enough until you see yourself in it. And then you're like, it's not that bad. It's like, right. It's the same old human thing every time.
I wrote a note about that because I was looking at a lot of old notes in writing this book. I've been looking at all these notes about notes I took in class years and years ago, notes I took in workshops of various kinds, seminars. One in particular was on working with the psychological shadow. And this exercise was name one thing that you're definitely not, and then name all the ways that you actually are that thing. And that's actually just a really useful touchstone, or it has been for me.
My first thing was I thought, I'm not a murderer.
Well, you scored slippery points for that one, right? But I think that's kind of maybe what we're being called to do at this moment historically. If we're gonna, I don't have advertisers on the podcast, but if you were to extract and deduce my ads based on the things that I seem to have to talk about in every episode, one of them is like, okay, well, let's situate this conversation historically.
Well, really, it would be, irrelevant to have advertisers on this podcast if it's meant for people in the future. And so maybe what the thing to do is to come up with products that you think will exist and then start doing advertisements for them. And then
send any money back in time, payments?
Either money back in time, or 20 years from now, whenever that product does come into fruition, you can bring them this episode. But hey, you owe me about $100,000 because I've already done a ton of advertising for you.
In fact, the name of your company came from my podcast.
I had a great, we can do one, I had a great product come to mind recently, which was for people who are worried about being buried alive. some people have a phobia or a fear, and it does sound quite awful. And it was called killer coffins. And so they're coffins that, and you open them up, but inside it's like an Iron Maiden where there's just a bunch of spikes. And so then you put the corpse in there. When you close it, it just lances the body with hundreds of really thick steel spikes. And then the tagline was like, if you weren't dead when you were buried, you will be.
That might actually come in handy in the future that I'm anticipating for us.
Oh, yeah?
At first, I thought you were going to talk about...
Discordian type of futuristic viewpoint?
God, no. Okay. I mean, Discordian, maybe.
Well, yeah,
dystopian. No, my view of the future...
I meant discord as in
yes.
non-harmonious.
Well,
but I do like discordian.
Dissonance is in the eye of the beholder.
I agree.
Or the ear of the beholder.
But, it's true. But what I was asking was a straightforward question. Do you think that life will be a chaotic nightmare full of suffering? Or do you think it will become more pleasant and more affable?
Yes.
Both of those?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Falling back on our originally established take both paths.
Right.
It seems that, and I won't bore listeners with this right now because I actually do go into great depth about this.
Well, they haven't even been born yet. So.
On a regular time. Then they've already read my book. So
refresh their memories with the new thing you're about to say.
The gist of it, as far as I can tell, is that evolution is a function of thermodynamics. It's a way of maximizing entropy in a given system, which means that evolutionary process obeys the same principles that lead to the formation of river systems. It's a fractal thing. Right. It takes every possible path that it can, and it dissipates that energy as effectively as possible. The energy will seek out.
Ice melting in a glass.
So you see this in the evolutionary history of Earth, that every extinction crisis is also a massive radiation crisis, if you want to call it that. It's an explosion of new diversity because all of these new niches are created. And the more niches that are created, the more species there are. The more species there are, the more niches are created. And overall, life basically as a kind of crystal that facilitates the distribution of energy, of sunlight, what they call like high energy, low entropy sunlight. And then it gets photosynthesized and then devoured and then devoured and devoured. And then we end up emitting a lot more lower energy photons from the planet than we absorbed.
Right.
And so like for this reason, like one thing that we can kind of be sure of, given the continuity of evolution, like given life,
right?
Even if we blew ourselves up now in another 4 billion years, we're almost guaranteed to have more kinds of life.
Yeah. Non-human.
Yeah.
And so stuff, more stuff.
So it's like, even in the short term, there are more jobs, more job titles now than there were 50 years ago. And there will be more, even if we're not thinking about them as jobs in the way that we think about them now, there will be more social functions, more cultural functions for people in 50 years.
Yeah, just look at sexual pronouns. It's a great example.
Yes. Actually, Greg Egan in his book Distress talks about viz and ver. And he had to invent a whole bunch of extra pronouns to cover it's still binary, but it's a spectrum of genders in his book.
I like the astral gendered one.
What's that name?
I identify with space as my sexuality.
Oh yeah. So there's it's meditation joke.
Yeah.
So that's actually that's I was reviewing the talk I gave at Boom Festival about this stuff last night. And in there, somebody asked about gender stuff. And it's like, do you really think that we're going to have identity politics in 100 years when you can, modify your DNA at will and print yourself a new set of genitals every day? Right.
And that's going to get weird. Porn is going to get really weird.
Oh yeah. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Future porn, if I say anything that's of value to you guys, like serious lasting value, then feel free to just pay me in future porn. I just want to know what I have to look forward to.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. But like this issue of identity, actually, this is an area I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on as a meditation instructor, as somebody who is helping people peel away the layers of bullshit and discover this kernel of essential self. I'd be curious, what your thoughts are on the future of identity, and the future of like, where do you see this human species going? Because to me, it looks like we're going to end up with some system approximating every individual is also their own religion, corporation, nation state, currency, gender, ethnicity. Like these things won't be like useful functional groupings anymore, because there will be, so much creative range to express ourselves even at the biological and psychological level.
Right. I mean, it just seems to me, if you look backwards, you can often see forwards. And I think that in general, that people will become, the nuance will get so great that it will sort of turn into, if you have a bunch of dry oatmeal that you're about to cook, okay, and you add water, you have a bunch of little pieces of dry oatmeal, and then you boil that and you get a bowl of mush. The pieces of oatmeal are still in there, and you can still see the individual pieces amongst the mush, but there's also a bowl of mush. I think that's what's going to happen.
You think we're going to homogenize?
Through extreme subtlety and, to the individual. I think that everyone will probably become so nuanced in their identity that it becomes a tapestry where nuance, the individualistic nuance is so commonplace and so everything that it becomes indistinguishable, which is irony. Sort
of like when you run out of names to use as like a username and you just append it with numbers. And it's like, that seems like the halfway point between a conversation between Cory and Michael and a conversation between like one IP address and another, right, where it's like, it's not even about the name anymore.
Yeah. Because if you looked at 10 IP addresses, you would see the individuality, but it also just looked like a bunch of IP addresses. Yeah.
So maybe ironically, we get to this point where we've exhausted our individuality.
Right. Everyone's going to be so individual that we're all going to be exactly like
burners.
I don't know what burners are.
Like Burning Man.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
And it's like, as far as Burning Man is actually a fairly accurate or useful window into certain streams of trending cultural evolution, as a physicalized internet, in that respect. Yeah. That thing about radical personal expression. So what does everybody do? Well, they dress up like a unicorn, or they get naked, or, you still end up sort of, when, you get accustomed to the counterculture, and then you're like, oh, you're fairy, you're an alien, you're a unicorn.
Mad Max, that seems to be the one I see often.
Mad Max, yeah. So, I mean, maybe it's not a useful question to ask whether you think that that's a hopeful future, or does it even matter?
I don't think it's just a happenstance of the future.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that our current form of identity is no greater or less great than the past or the future. I mean, I think it's just all what is, and I just accept the state of being as glorious and what is in front of my nervous system that's being abstracted. Because being, as I said, whenever I got here, and you were saying we'll have a great conversation, and maybe you could have a great conversation with my roommate at another time. And I was like, well, me saying hi to him was as great as the conversation that we'll have on your podcast. It's in the eye of the beholder. If you see the value and brilliance of engaging with someone in a moment by just saying hello, and also having a rich, contemplative conversation. I mean, to me, they both have the same value.
Intrinsic value.
Intrinsic value, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just being awake is a continuous state of being and interacting with now. And so it's a constant gratitude and appreciation for the ability to be conscious of what's happening. And so even negative experiences, although they suck, I still think, oh, it's valuable, because for whatever reason, there was a vibration of consciousness in this, meat taxi that was able to observe it. And that is something that I feel like I don't take lightly. Because the chances of me existing are next to impossible. The math that it worked out, that in the planet and the universe, that if you believe in the Big Bang, or however you think the cosmos came to be, and that there was an Earth in a Goldilocks zone, and then, billions years came around, and then 150,000 years ago, some little monkeyish things beginning to snoop around, and then so forth and so forth and so forth, and somehow I am here. The chances of that amongst all of the light years of galaxies and solar systems out there in the cosmos, it's, when they say, that British saying that being born British is like winning the lottery in life, I think being born human is like winning the cosmic lottery, man. Or just being born at all,
This is another note from our sponsors. Let's bring it around all the way back to the first thing we were talking about, which is that issue of encountering the alien, right? And it's like, well, we're going about it all wrong, because we're looking for something that's us. So it seems very likely to me that the odds that we give ourselves for existing, and the likelihood that we think that we have of encountering something truly other, and the way that we frame that search and what we're looking for, that all of it is based on some pretty staggering assumptions. And that, I kind of camp with Terence McKenna on the notion that if something truly alien shows up to you, you're not even going to notice it,
right? Because
it has no reference to your conditioned nervous system. It's not even gonna blip on your radar. The truly alien. So that's, I do wonder about, the lottery. What are the odds really?
Not great.
1 in 1, apparently.
Yeah.
Like the most rigorous thing that we can say is insufficient data. But I do like, to the extent that it enables or empowers you to appreciate the blessing of your human incarnation. I'd say it's a fine thing to sit with.
It doesn't. I guess it doesn't empower me or anything. I'm not, walking around being overly sentimental, and
you're not like, I won.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, hey, man, the chances that you're here in the shape you are real slim, and a little bit of mindfulness to be able to appreciate that you're getting to experience a life makes the life that you are experiencing a lot sweeter and richer.
Definitely. Well, okay. The last thing, ordinarily we ask people if they have an intentional message for the listening future. You want to make eye contact with that video camera,
right?
And give the future a little wink or something. In this case, though, I think we've established that the not knowing and the questioning and the mystery may actually be of greater value than whatever answers we think we have. So I'm actually more curious to know what question you have for the future.
Did everyone finally realize that their reality is subjective? I've been watching that for 15 years, being like, when are people gonna... This is so obvious, like, and that's why I keep talking about it, because no one realizes it. So did that ever happen? Do you know you're making interpretations of what's out there?
That'll be a fine question to touch base on later, I'm sure.
I can't wait to hear the results.
So where can people find your work?
Cory-allen.com. It's my website. You can check out my podcast, The Astral Hustle. That's there. My music is there. There's also links to binaural beats that I created are also on that site. Some for meditation, for flow state, etc. But they're not your dad's binaural beats, man. They're kind of a different system, different approach, very complex narrative experience. Also, my meditation course is called Release Into Now. If you go to releaseintonow.com, you can sign up for that. It's going to begin actually another round of enrollment on this Monday, which I believe is the 24th of October. So I don't know when this comes out, but that'll be open for a week-ish. So you can do that. And and you can also just find me just out in the world. You know, I might just, maybe I'll just walk by. So you can find me there as well.
Yeah, you got to check his Google Latitude.
Yeah, check my Google Latitude. You ever think about that with followers? Like if the amount of people that you have following you on social media, if they were actually walking behind you, or like a crowd that was following you around, and that the thing that you tweet or that you post on Facebook was, if you turned around and said that to 10,000 people, how would it change what you were saying and how absurd it is?
That's a very fine question in its own respect. That asking, are people going to realize it's an interpretation? Mm-hmm. Seems to be running in parallel with do people realize they're having this conversation in public?
Yeah.
You're like talking shit on Facebook Messenger, and you're like, are you aware that everything will one day come to light?
Yeah.
Would you speak this way to me in front of your mother? Because you're about to as soon as I screenshot this.
And I really hope not, because me and Michael Phillip from Third Eye Podcast, we're talking about doing like a monthly subscription, like $9.95 or whatever, to our text message feed.
Oh, he was telling me it would have gotten you excommunicated.
Who, me?
Both of you. He said,
no, that's the thing, man. And I'm open. I would happily read that transcript as the form of a next podcast. All right, man. I got to wrap it up.
Well, that sounds good, man. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
I look forward to chatting with you more. It's obvious that there's plenty to talk about here.
I didn't feel like that. No, I'm just joking. Well, yeah, we'll do another one in the future, man.
Good. We disagree.
Yeah.
Take care.
Love it. Thank you.
We've got a lot more to learn. The work is not done here, and we may not ever figure it out. We probably won't figure it out.